Hi, everyone, and welcome to Subsistence Crop, a podcast cultivated by the Cannabis Studies Lab at Cal Poly Humboldt, where we talk about human cannabis relationships beyond commerce and prohibition.
Well, today we have with us Dan Marr, our lecturer in the Cal Poly Humboldt Cannabis Studies major, our environmental stewardship ace. Really happy to have you with the program, Dan, and really happy to be able to sit down and have a little kind of getting to know you session with Cade and Caleb here also on the mics.
Hey. Hello.
And I think we're going to keep it, pretty straightforward. And just start by asking you about your backgrounds and how your journey to becoming our environmental stewardship major ace. Where would you locate the beginning of that, and what are the broad outlines of that story?
Wow. It started in my grandparents' backyard when I was a little kid. They grew a lot of their own food in the middle of the San Fernando Valley. They were first-generation immigrants. And even though I didn't know it, I was absorbing that from them, growing food, making compost, maintaining things, fixing things because you didn't have enough money to buy new things, just being more resilient and more sustainable in their finances, which was also translating ecologically too, because they were growing food. And it was a small little suburban property, but still, it was full of plants and full of bees and insects and birds, and it was really far out. And then from there I took the traditional, I went to school and public school and was searching for something, loved science, loved it so much that I was the kid who wanted to go camping so I could walk around and find cool stuff and then, look it up in a book kind of thing. I had the subscription to National Geographic when I was a kid instead of Mad Magazine, stuff like that. And then I graduated high school. I went to UC San Diego. I went from the San Fernando Valley to San Diego, and I went from, a pretty small high school to a campus with 40,000 kids. And I was in an auditorium, and if I wanted to talk to that professor, it was good luck. If you're not in the top 5%, you don't get to talk to the professor, go talk to a TA. And I'm this is not what I want. So I bailed, and I took a road trip, and I looped all the western states, and I needed gas, and I got off in Arcata. And I was coming from the north, and I got off, and I come off at sunset, and I'm is that a skate park? And then I transferred, and I've been here ever since 1997.
1997 is when you landed.
Landed in 97.
Arcata had a skate park back then.
We still do. I haven't been there in a while. Yeah.
Okay, do you use that skate park?
I do not, but I've definitely seen it, and my guess is it's a new one. Okay. I don't think you can see it from the freeway.
I'm sure it's probably a new one.
You get off at sunset, and it's right there on your right by the tennis.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you transferred to then Humboldt State University.
It was HSU, and I still call it HSU.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny. Yeah. I transferred to Humboldt State. I was studying wildlife and fisheries.
There we go.
Yep. So full-on sciences. I needed a job, so I was looking around for a job, and then somehow I landed with work study in a school, and just totally out of the blue. I was never on the teacher track. Really enjoyed that. And the teacher's wow, you know a lot about science. Why don't you teach the science to the kids? So I started doing that, and the next thing I know, I was a science teacher.
How many, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say for what age?
That was a charter school, and at that time when I rolled in there, that was 99. There was about 25 kids, and it was 5th through 10th grade was the group of kids they had. And I stayed there for 13 or 14 years, and when I left, it was a full-on K-12 charter school, and I was teaching high school biology and chemistry.
Wow. It's cool.
Yeah. So that's how I got into teaching. But I kept the passion of science alive, not just through my teaching, but through exploring this county and this northern region of the state and all the neighboring states. And then I discovered permaculture, and then I started doing that in the summers because I wasn't teaching. And then that just kept evolving to where I had this clientele who was like, no, don't go back to teaching. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of getting burned out on the system. And then I just shifted to permaculture full time. And then last year I had lunch with Dominic, and it's like, hey. So that's my circle.
So there was, well, I mean, it sounds like there was a demand for the services in this area, for, what was that like? Like, who needed permaculture instruction?
Well, permaculture's been around for a long time. Bill Mollison, he put this together back in the 70s after Australia had its Dust Bowl. And they're like, whoa, we need to do stuff differently. We can't follow America's lead and just go to chemicals. That doesn't work. How can we do this different? How can we do ag different? And so that's when it started. And I realized a lot of the stuff that I was interested in, and then a lot of stuff that I was doing, like I was doing landscape maintenance, and I was doing mow, blow, go stuff to, kind of help me pay the rent. And it was just always like, let's do something instead of cut lawns, instead of putting in another Escalonia hedge, let's put in a native hedge, or let's plant some fruit trees, stuff like that. And so people were transitioning because we were going through the cycles of El Nino, La Nina, but then we were hitting these drought periods. 2013 into 2015 was heavy. People ran out of water, especially in the hills. And when I studied permaculture and became a designer, that was my track, was water. It was all about the water. And so that's how I got into working with cannabis farmers was water.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. What were people growing in the hills? But I've been aware of this, interest in, and then what I would call like almost like a social movement within kind of cannabis growing, communities on the West Coast toward principles of regenerative agriculture and more than sustainable approaches to the environment. And I think I might have noticed it maybe in 2015, 2016. When did you start to notice, I guess, like, because this happened like almost like in the middle of the green rush, when like a lot of the opposite stuff was going on, but there started to be like this increasing awareness of and desire for, something that was not that. Could you speak a little bit about like your sense of when that began to become something that, like, especially in cannabis communities in this area, there began to be an interest in learning about and pursuing what I call more than sustainable environmental practices?
Yeah, I mean, that thread was always there. Mm-hmm. The thread was there with indigenous cultures, and it was kept all the way through. A lot of the Back to the Landers. The thread was there. The green rush kind of changed it, and every generation has a different perspective on how to do the same thing, but just in a different way. And the green rush brought in big time economics, and I'm not an economic major, but I know how supply and demand works. And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa. So then, how do I work my economic margins? Well, if you're growing cannabis way up in the hills, the only way to do that is to become more ecological. Right? How do you make more money? You spend less. You utilize the resources that are available to you. And that just so happens to be how nature does it. So a lot of it was tied to economics. I need to expand my margins here. The thread was always there, but then I think there was also a general shift in the paradigm consciously beyond cannabis. I think in ag general, climate disruptions, abnormalities, change, whatever we want to call it. Like, things were shifting, things were changing, and innovations were coming along too, which is great, but not everyone can afford the latest and greatest innovations. And a lot of those innovations don't belong in the hills. Like, they require a lot of energy, or they just don't work. So how can we do things differently but still achieve the same goals? And that's when it really took off. And I think the culture in the industry is such that, you go up in the hills to be a way to do something. And initially it was so you didn't get in trouble for it, right? You could hide in the trees kind of thing. But then you're like, how do you become resilient? It's like, well, you lean on each other. It's like, oh, my chainsaw broke. Here, borrow mine. Hey, pull me out of the ditch. Okay, I'll be over there in a minute. And then it's like, yo, how come your plants look so much better than mine? I'm so stressed, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm doing this. It's like, what? What is that? And then it just rolls from there.
Well, been golf. That is really a good point, Ed. Oh, shit. Sorry, I should have brought a glass of water. I've been coughing a lot since I had the flu. Okay. This is good. I managed to hold off till you got to it.
Yeah.
And feel free to jump in on questions, by the way.
Yeah.
I guess for our listeners that might be from out of the area, could you talk about what the hills mean in terms of cannabis cultivation as opposed to the not hills?
Well, you can look at it from an agricultural perspective. As soon as you leave ag land, you're in the hills. And this county's pretty limited on where the ag land is. I mean, we have amazing prime ag land. It's amazing. And there's farms there doing, amazing things from a regenerative perspective. So for me, it's, if you're looking at an agricultural crop, as soon as you leave, your traditional ag locations, then you're in the hills. When you leave pavement, there's these little benchmarks when you're no longer connected to the grid, whether that be power, water, some sort of infrastructure. You're in the hills.
So, tell us a little bit about the Gen conference that you were involved with.
So I think it was 2016, something like that. I think it's blurred at this point. I was teaching, well, it was a little earlier than that, actually. It was in 2013. I was teaching workshops at one of the local shops. They would host workshops once a month. And I taught one there, and then I took over coordinating these workshops. And then I started meeting really cool people who had lots to share to our community. And so they started teaching. But just lots of people that just came and just wanted to learn more. And, a pub opened up 2 blocks away. So we would just carry the conversations on down there. And I got to make some really good friends. And they were connected to other places in the industry. And, the Emerald Cup being one of them. And so, Jesse Dodd was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Let's make this something bigger. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. So, he formed the Regenerative Cannabis Farm Award, and I got on board and just trying to really promote these practices, which are really old practices. This is not new technology. But how do we promote these to the industry at large, number one, and number two, how do we get the farms that are already implementing these practices, how do we get them some play? How do we let the consumers out there know, like, there's different ways to cultivate cannabis, and depending on why, cannabis is a part of your life, you might want to align your principles based on how it's being cultivated and how it's being farmed. Yeah. And that was the biggest venue to be able to do it in. I don't know how many thousands of people went through those gates on the weekend. And it went from, just a small award and a couple of, speaking opportunities to a whole day of speaking opportunities to setting up, demonstration areas. And it really grew from there. And then it made its way up into Oregon, the Cultivation Classic up in Portland, which was really cool to see it expand. And then that was just happening all at once. The media was picking up on this. Instagram was a thing. And so that was really spreading, everything at the same time as well. And so, like I said earlier, a lot of folks were getting into this because, wow, this makes economic sense for me, or wow, this makes ethical sense from like an environmental or ecological place.
Did your work with Sun and Earth start before the regional award was started, or after?
No, I had met Andrew Black at one of the events. I don't recall which one, but my work with them was most recent. I was subcontracted for the grant that they were working on. And that was really cool to see that, Department of Fish and Wildlife is like, hey, we have this money and we want to put it back into the system and help with restoring the habitats we've been entrusted to protect. Like how can we promote this? And that was really cool to go out to farms and speak with the farmers and ask them what they need, what types of resources, whether it be financial resources or information or other professionals to come in and help them with things, and then to like hopefully solicit the money to implement those types of regenerative practices.
Can you talk in a little more detail about like what the grant money would be used for? What are the different ways in which they could spend that money?
Yeah, I was more boots on the ground and preparing, recommendations for the implementation of projects. A lot of it was focused around water conservation. So getting people storage that didn't have storage, helping them develop more sustainable systems, maybe alternative systems, maybe instead of, just getting them tanks, let's get them tanks, but also get them hooked up to rainwater and get them off of the surface water diversion kind of thing. Habitat was another one. Like, how do we promote healthy habitats in conjunction with the constructed environments of, the agricultural practices? For example, growing out hedgerows, bringing in beneficial insects, whether they're like pest predators. So now you're integrating your pest management protocols with your ag, so you're applying less pesticides, whether they be chemical or biological. Educating is another piece of this, like maybe hosting workshops, community-based workshops or on-farm workshops, stuff like that. And then big stuff, which takes a lot more money and a lot more time, but it's like helping folks fix their roads and replace their culverts, which is it's a tough one, but it's really important. But, when you look at the cost of replacing a culvert or even getting to that point, the engineering and the permitting and just everything that goes into it, it's really daunting for folks.
It's incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
I know that there's been some Project Trellis grants that have gone out to help people do that as well. I do feel like here in Humboldt, there have been more opportunities for people to get access to resources for any number of reasons, which we could go into it at a later date. But let me make sure I'm including my my students here and asking questions. But have you guys gotten to discussing the curriculum? Basically, like what do you teach in your classes, and what would you like to teach?
Or you could ask these guys.
Yeah, I mean, throw it back at it.
Yeah, we got midterms next week, so we've done something.
Kate and I are taking Cannabis and Environmental Sustainability with Dan Marr right now. Classes on Monday and Wednesday. In fact, we just got done with our Wednesday class, and what we were doing today was we were applying a rubric that we had made together as a class on 3 different farms that Dan provided pictures and anecdotes and information on. So it was very much like a hands-on kind of approach without being out in the field, but really as close as we could get from in a classroom without touching the plant.
Yeah, that is a limit, right?
Yeah. I would say that's okay from where I'm coming from. So my work on farms and out in the hills, I don't consult on cultivating cannabis. I consult on stewarding land. And I believe if you are stewarding your land, then the cultivating the cannabis is easier. And I just talked about, hedgerows, beneficial hedgerows. It's like, if you build the habitat for these predators that already exist, for the pests that are coming after your crop, then you are dealing with it less. We talked about pests and pest management. We're like, what is a pest? And it's like, well, it's something that you don't want around because it's harming, your crop, which is your industry and your market. It's like, okay, so it's just something out of balance. It's always been there. It's just out of balance. How do we bring that balance back again? How do we create the habitat so that the lacewings come back, the parasitic wasps come back and take care of the caterpillars, take care of the aphids? So when we have that imbalance, and it's like, okay, well, why do they want that cannabis plant? It's like, because it's the only green thing in the landscape right now, and
We need more diversity.
yeah, and it's juicy and it's full of, fluids. Of course, they're all over it. So that's where we started, right? What are the foundations? What's going on? And then once we understand that, then we can start understanding how can we measure, how can we even assess if something is sustainable? Because if we don't understand the foundations, then we can't make those judgment calls at all.
What do you think of the term sustainability?
We talked about that.
Yeah.
That was like our first week conversation. What did we talk about with that word?
Sustainability, I think, is making sure that you have the essential things you need to survive. For me, sustainability would be having resources such as water, food, and shelter, and making sure that you can divvy those up fairly between yourself and your community.
And that community includes the environment. So sustainability is all about balance.
Yeah. So that's where we came to. We're like, okay, it's a foundation. It's a baseline. Once that's dialed in, then we can up level. Then we can go to what's, termed now regenerative. You can implement systems that require time, money, resources in a sustainable way, but you could also look at them a little bit differently and divide that energy and resource over many systems just by integrating them.
I have a question. What does stewarding the land mean to you?
Well, as a permaculture designer, I look to the environment to tell me what that means. And it's getting harder and harder because it's harder and harder to find mature, untouched environments where we can really learn from that. So we can infer a lot. We have great, amazing landscapes and ecosystems here, but let's not forget they've been altered a lot over time through management or through lack of management. So we can then, if I can have those analog environments to look at, I can talk to people who have been around for a long time, especially a lot of our local indigenous folks. They can give you a lot of insight in that. So it's really specific to where you are, and that's how I approach it. I don't come in like I already have my rubric set, on how to evaluate this system. I spend a lot of time just objectively observing it. And then it's almost like the land tells me, what it needs. And I use all my senses. It's like go into a forest and close your eyes. What do you hear? More importantly, what don't you hear? It's like if you don't hear birds, then there's an imbalance. So you start thinking about, okay, from a sustainability place, what do birds need? They need food, they need water, they need shelter, habitat. Do they have that around here? And at what level do they have that? And then you can just start being like, the plant communities are out of balance. It's not that there are no birds, they're just not here because it's not suitable for them. So that's what land stewardship means to me, is like, I observe, I talk to people, and then I can start stewarding the land or setting up the plan or the protocols for someone to do that.
How would you like to see this curriculum develop over time, this environmental stewardship concentration, as it were?
I would like for us to, what we did today in class, do in the field. I presented 3 different farms to them today, and they went through their rubrics in terms of evaluating the level of sustainability. And it took a lot of energy, on both of our parts, on my part in presenting it to them, but also on theirs, on like focusing and assessing through pictures or through data tables that I provided them with. But like I said, when the class began, I'm like, remember, this this is an exercise. This does not replace actually going out and immersing yourself in the environment. And none of the stuff we did today had anything to do with the plant. But at the same time, it had everything to do with the plant.
100%.
Yeah. So I would like for more opportunities for the students to apply themselves, and not just apply their knowledge, but to apply themselves into experiencing the environment, experiencing a watershed, experiencing a hilltop, experiencing a forest, one that's been managed, one that hasn't been managed.
I can say we want that too. We want that too. We want to get out in the fields.
Yeah.
Some more field trips for sure.
Yeah, but this has to be a tiered approach as well. It's kind of like everyone comes in from a different place. So we have to make sure that everyone's got the same baseline foundation understanding of those systems. The basics of soils, the basics of botany, the basics of how ecosystems work, climate, geography, topography. And then once we have those basics, then, okay, let's go out, learn more in the environment, and then come back, synthesize it again, and then go back out again, reassess, evaluate. So I see it as this tiered approach, and you can't do this in 16 weeks. We meet for an hour and 20 minutes twice a week. It's not possible.
Yeah.
So more classes.
Yeah.
Say a little bit about that in terms of what you just described was like an intro class.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically field science for cannabis majors.
Yeah.
I'd like to do that too. Let's work together to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a process, but I think we can do it.
I mean, I think the fact that this program exists at this university is a testament to the environment, the culture, and the industry that is here. And I feel like if we don't do that, we're doing a disservice not only to the students, but a disservice to this local community and a disservice to the environment that we should be stewarding.
So for some of that, we're going to need some rules to change as well. There are guardrails that we have. What are the specific guardrails you think that you see right now that need to come down? Because I want to work with everyone on what we can do right now, as well as have a plan for what we will be able to do if certain things happen that are completely outside of our control. So for instance, if we went through the right channels, we could access, farm bill hemp, basically, right? To do that, we would need to make sure that we got approval from the county for Cal Poly Humboldt to be identified as a research institution. That could then apply to the state for the state form. And then the sort of like, well, where is that? Are we growing it here? Or are we just simply like, oh, we're going to access, somebody's farm that is, farm bill hemp, i.e. CBD or CBG, or basically under 0.3% THC at this point. So there's a lot to kind of figure out around that. But that's possible now, actually. I mean, it's something we could work on. The other part, obviously, is like being able to go to farms where currently state legal cannabis is being grown. And that one's a little outside our control.
Mm-hmm.
It may change with rescheduling, which seems to be on the horizon even this year.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, I'm not entirely sure, right? These things take a while. So, in the meantime, are there other ways for students to be able to get out into the field to go to a hilltop, for example, that isn't, a licensed farm necessarily, but to be able to get out in nature, to go to, a regenerative farm, period, right? let's work together to develop that. But like, do you have any comments on what it is you want to see us working together on? Like, starting now, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. I got a lot. I will say, first off, though, is I think we need to approach this with small cumulative changes.
Yeah.
A couple weeks ago, I'm like, yo, meet me in the parking lot. We're going to go walk into the forest because we have it right here behind us. Yeah, I know no one's cultivating cannabis in a redwood forest, right outside here, but it's about where is this stuff taking place? Where is cannabis in this county, most of it being cultivated? And it's in the forest, so we can go and study forest ecosystems and have that baseline fundamental understanding of what it means to then adapt that land to then cultivate a particular crop. So that's very easy. Taking field trips into various watersheds is very easy to do and not be on the farm. The other thing is cannabis is not being grown year-round. So there's lots of opportunities to go to farms when the plant's not in the ground. But everything else that is the systems that support the cultivation of that plant is there. It's all there. So that's all very possible. And as you outlined that, as you were going through that, in my mind, it was paralleling the reason why I moved out of compliance. It's the same thing. Compliance, especially environmental compliance, it all came from a good place. But man, it got mired and off the tracks so many times. It's like we're all here because we all want clean water and fish in the river, but we can't get the work done to keep the sediment out of the creek for whatever reason. No one can afford it, or there's just the permits take too long and we're back into another wet season, so you can't do the work. You got to wait till the next dry season. And that's where I think we need to look at, like I was outlining with the class, is these small cumulative changes. If everybody was doing these small things, we would have massive change in the watersheds. We don't need to do these massive projects that are millions of dollars and took 10 years in planning. It's like if we did small things on 10 or 20, 40 acre parcels, the effect would be huge. It would be huge.
Well, I'm hoping that can be a topic of conversation at the symposium coming up on April 5th.
I will make sure of it.
Excellent. As my keynote, and you are charged with this mission. Really looking forward to that. Do you have any thoughts about that symposium and questions about like who might be there or ideal audiences across agency stakeholders, NGO people? I know there's some people that you've worked with, as well as cultivators that are going to be there. Maybe, I guess, do you have any comments right now or thoughts about the symposium coming up?
I'm excited about it. I'm really excited that it's a Cal Poly symposium. I feel like in a lot of circles, there needs to be some amount of legitimacy for certain folks to attend, whether it be on a panel or just in the audience. And I think that this does that for them. There's been lots of events, cannabis events that have focused on, environmental compliance or land stewardship or whatever, but the events were too not in many people's circles. Yeah. And so they just didn't participate, even though they were a part of the big circle, which is land use. Cannabis happens to be one of those types. So I think I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to have folks come in that haven't in the past.
I'm actually hearing that there's a lot of interest in the cultivation community in particular, in coming out and having these discussions. I'm hoping that we also get good audience participation from, the planning department, from the various, local agencies that, we don't have a panel that's local agencies, it's actually state agencies pretty much. But to have a chance to talk about how to create the opportunity to do small cumulative change, right? As you put it. What can we do with what we have right now? What are the resources that are currently out there? What kinds of channels can we dig in between, the people that could use those resources and really get us on that path? And the agencies who they have grant money these days. Thanks to especially the federal funding that's been coming in around climate change. And I think it's just a rich moment and opportunity for, an industry that I think has really come full circle from the green rush back to the legacy of the back to landers in many ways, which is that they're here because this is their community, not because they're going to get rich. And stewarding the environment is a really important part of making sure that, the land is there for their children and grandchildren and their neighbors and other people with, those kinds of values going forward in the future. So I think it's a good moment. I think that it's like what happens after a forest fire, right? Like what grows. And I think that's kind of the moment we're in. And it's an opportunity to really participate in the regeneration of the landscape in a way that is like with the environment, not trying to, master it or turn it towards strictly, agribusiness or industrial uses. So I'm pretty excited about it too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And the greater paradigm is shifting too, because you look at just the state's perspective on fire and bringing fire back to the land. Like that has gone from a conversation to actually, stuff is getting lit on fire in a controlled way. And it's really cool.
And a lot of that's happening like in relation to traditional ecological knowledge, right? Like the indigenous communities are being listened to and I think consulted more. And I'm hoping also, of course, that we do a better job of that around here. The event's going to be at the Native Forum, which is a lovely space on campus that Native American Studies Department has graciously, granted our use of it, and we want to honor that. I think that environmental stewardship is part of that legacy, right? That predates when we started to get more aware about awareness of industrial impacts.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that too.
Yeah. I think with that being said, did you want to give a little preview on your keynote?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and it's kind of like our class. It's like there's so much to cover and so little time to do it. So I just keep coming back to small change for great effect. How can we all, everyone in the room, implement small changes that will have great effect? Because we already know big changes create big effect. We're having to clean up a lot of that stuff right now. But how can we implement these small changes, whether it's a small change to a policy, or it's a small change to the way someone cultivates, or it's a small change to the way someone just sees their land and how somebody governs a land? I think if we can just look at it like that, this doesn't have to take a decade of planning. This doesn't have to take millions of dollars in grants. No, if we could just all sit down and talk about how we can implement these small changes, which can happen right now, we're going to see big changes, great effect. I think that's what I'm focused on. And I'm looking forward to the panels and folks asking those kinds of questions to the panels, and, in their realm of expertise, being like, what small change do you see in your, realm can be made so that there's a great effect, ripple effect to the whole entire industry and our environment.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, just like, not just for being on this podcast, for joining us on this journey with this major.
Thanks.
We are so grateful for you. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the years to come.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be with the students again. It's just, it gives me goosebumps.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. This is what makes it worth it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, let's conclude.
Thank you for growing with Subsistence Crop, a podcast by the Cannabis Studies Lab at Cal Poly Humboldt.